Welcome, future managers. If you're knee-deep in your Introduction to Management coursework right now, you already know that figuring out how to run an organization on paper is one thing, but actually keeping it on track in the real world, yeah, that's a whole different beast. Today, we're going to translate all that textbook theory into actionable strategies for effective organizational control. We're talking about making that massive leap from being just a stressed-out supervisor to becoming a true forward-thinking leader. So let's get into it.
It's a question literally every leader has to ask themselves at some point. Are you actually managing, or are you just micromanaging? Look, trying to strictly control every tiny element of an operation is a super common trap. But as your university materials lay out pretty clearly, it wastes your valuable time, it drains money, and honestly, worst of all, it completely demoralizes your employees. It's just incredibly frustrating for everyone involved.
Okay, here is our roadmap for today. We're going to shift your management style from reactive micromanagement to proactive, future-directed control. We'll start by designing smart systems, drilling down into strategic and critical points, uncovering the massive flaw in traditional feedback, and finally, equipping you with feed-forward techniques to actually manage the future.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, Designing Smart Control Systems. So how do we actually build a highly effective control system without driving our team, or honestly ourselves, completely crazy? Well, the golden rule of management control, straight from your text, is this. The most effective managers select their control points very carefully and very sparingly. You literally cannot monitor everything. If you try to track every single paperclip and every coffee break, you're going to lose sight of the actual big picture business goals. You really have to know what truly needs to be controlled. To pull that off, you first have to identify your key result areas, or KRAs. Think of these as the major cross-functional activities that will basically make or break the entire organization's success. We're talking about massive things like overall production quality, total sales volume, or labor turnover. You only want to select areas for control that genuinely have the power to affect the entire organization. These KRAs, they form the absolute bedrock of your control system. Moving right along to Section 2, Finding Strategic Control Points. Okay, so once you know your broad key result areas, you've got to drill down even further to locate your strategic control points, or SCPs for short. You do this by focusing only on the very small percentage of activities that account for the highest proportion of your problems or your expenses. You're basically looking for representative activities that give you the pulse of the whole operation. Doing this drastically reduces the amount of information you have to gather and evaluate on a daily basis. Now, what's genuinely wild about this is how extreme the math actually gets in the real world when we look for these strategic points. Get this. Consider that just 2% of a company's entire customer base might account for a massive 80% of its product sales. I mean, think about that. If you're managing sales, you don't need to apply the exact same strict control mechanisms to every single one of your buyers. Instead, you strategically focus your energy on that crucial 2%. Or let's look at it from a personnel perspective, which I know pops up a lot in your management coursework. A mere 1% of an industry's employees might cause 90% of all employee grievances. No way, right? But it's true, and it proves exactly why you absolutely must target your monitoring points strategically. Why on earth would you monitor 100% of your staff with heavy-handed rules when almost all the friction comes from a tiny, tiny fraction? Find the strategic points and you instantly gain massive leverage. All right, let's jump into Section 3, Setting Critical Point Standards. So after you figure out what to monitor, you need a precise measuring stick to evaluate performance, right? Every goal basically translates into a standard. What we're looking at here perfectly organizes the 6 critical point standards you're going to use. It ranges from simple physical quantities like, say, units produced per hour, all the way down to complex intangible relationships. I actually really want to highlight that intangible row. Measuring things like staff loyalty or a supervisor's dedication to company objectives, that is incredibly hard to quantify. There are no perfect physical metrics for human relationships, so managers often just have to rely on trial and error, or even informal gatherings to get a read on things. But look, whether it's physical, cost, or totally intangible, you absolutely must have a standard in place. Which brings us to Section 4, the postmortem problem. Okay, here is where we hit a massive roadblock in traditional management thinking. The really crucial point here is this striking warning directly from your source text. Relying entirely on feedback is basically just conducting a post-mortem. Think about it. Most managers look at information, feedback, they look at the deviations from their standards, and then, only then, they initiate a program to fix it. But knowing about deviations long after they've already happened, that's totally useless for preventing the damage that was already done. You can't change the past. And that leads right into Section 5 feed forward, or managing the future. This realization forces a complete paradigm shift in your introduction to management studies. Look at the difference here. While feedback merely reports on failures after the fact, feed forward aggressively anticipates potential problems so you can act before they ever derail your goals. It's like this. Feedback tells you the ship just hit an iceberg. Feed forward tells you there's an iceberg 5 miles ahead so you can just turn the wheel today. Huge difference, right? As our university material strongly reinforces, true control means looking ahead, not steering directly into the rearview mirror. You need a system that actually warns you in time to fix things before they break. Let's see how this builds into a strict methodology. To actually implement feed-forward control, you've got to follow these 6 precise requirements. You don't just, guess the future. You carefully analyze your planning and control systems, you develop a working model of how things interact, and you constantly collect and assess input data. If you spot variations in your inputs today, you immediately take action in Step 6 to solve the problems those variations will inevitably cause tomorrow. Finally, we arrive at Section 6, Techniques for Future-Directed Control. So, how do we actually do this practically? Let's wrap up this explainer by looking at how your ability to manage tomorrow depends heavily on a few key things. How well you utilize forecasts based on the absolute latest available information, your advanced planning, and identifying potential problem areas well before they physically manifest. Practically speaking, this means using advanced techniques like PERT networks, which visually map out all your task dependencies, so you can clearly foresee where a tiny delay today ruins a massive delivery next month. It also means a meticulous cash planning. As the text super wisely points out, it is hardly a great idea to wait for a report at the end of December to figure out if you had enough cash back in November to cover the checks you already wrote. You have got to plan ahead. We're going to leave you, future managers, with this final thought to apply to your coursework and honestly your entire future careers. The ultimate lesson of management control is this. Since you can never, ever change the past, how will you redesign your systems today to actually control tomorrow? Think on that one. Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer. Keep focusing on those future metrics, and we'll catch you next time.